Good evening, everyone. Please take your seats. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Ternan. I'm the Pastoral Care Director for the Elderly and the Sick here at Holy Family Church. We are co-hosting this very special evening with the Alumni Association of Santa Clara University. And we are so honored to have our very special guest, Father Greg Boyle. Please let me introduce Sarah Bonini from Santa Clara University. Go Broncos.
Thanks, Mary. My name is Sarah Bonini, as she said, and I work at the Santa Clara University Alumni Association, and this is truly a dream come true for me. Having a deep sense of gratitude is steeped in Ignatian tradition. I have overwhelming feelings of gratitude this evening. Thank you, Mary Ternan, SCU class of '83, and the entire parish team here at Holy Family for allowing Santa Clara University to share this space and special evening together and providing Father Greg's books for sale and all the wonderful behind-the-scenes things that they've done. Thank you, Allison Lass, SCU class of '87, who works at Homeboy Industries and was instrumental in setting up this amazing opportunity. Thank you, Homegirl Cafe, for providing the delicious pastries, and mostly, thank you, Father Greg, who, by the way, received his master's at SCU's Jesuit School of Theology in 1986, for taking the time to share your incredible journey of service with us. In addition to expressing gratitude, St. Ignatius also instructed his companions to be men for others. At SCU, students are charged to be men and women for others, both locally and globally. And in the Alumni Association, we strive to be alumni for others. This dedication to service is a cornerstone of Ignatian spirituality and fully embodied by Father Greg. We are all here tonight to listen to Father Greg's incredible stories of courage and fortitude, which have motivated and inspired him to be truly a man for others. He once stated that my job isn't to fix or rescue or save. It's to accompany, see people, listen to them. It is with this humble and pastoral care that Father Greg draws people to him and sets an example for us all. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce G-Dog and Todd and Jessica, who are two of his trainees at Homeboy Industries. Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Todd Washington. I'm a trainee at Homeboy Industry and a son of Father Greg. I'm a 32-year-old man. I come out of South Central Los Angeles. At a very young age, I was involved in some wild things, and my parents would always tell me, they wanted me to do better. They would always tell me do better, but I couldn't find that way, and I couldn't see it that way. So as a teenager, I got involved in some things I shouldn't have due to peer pressure and just being around my urban community and around my youth. I cut my education to hang out with the crowd, which only led me deeper into darker places, such as prison and even as a juvenile. And I still would find time to say, hey man, this is what I want. This is what I want to do, and my parents would still be on me. You need to do better. Go to school, do something with yourself. And I wasn't having it. until I made a longer stay in the prison. So I end up coming home, and I got married. I had 2 children, 2 beautiful children. And I seen a different light, and I told myself, I want something different for myself this time around, So I had some friends that I came up with that was that was around me around that time, and they were seeking for change as well. And we kind of like sat around one night, and we were saying, hey man, we need to do something with ourselves and make a change, So another good friend of ours, a young lady named Stephanie, comes through the door, and she's like, hey, what are you guys doing with yourself? And we trying to find a job, And she was like, hey, come down to Homeboy Industry. So we had friends there previously, and they would always invite us down and welcome us, and we was like, nah, this not for us, And so we took a chance, and we went down there, and I mean, it was great. Father Greg welcomed us with open arms, and so now I'm currently a trainee. They have all these educational programs, silk screening, bakery. It's a lot of different opportunities there, and I'm just great to have them. And I'm grateful for Father Greg. I'm grateful for Stephanie as well. I mean Jessica. I'm sorry. I'm grateful for Jessica. Bear with me. I'm very sorry. And I mean, we're all sisters and brothers there, and it's a very great program. And I just welcome a friend of mine. He's about 50, 51, and he was looking for employment. And I brought him right to Homeboy Industry, and he should be starting in about a week or so, So this is a great program, and I'm very grateful for it. And I'm grateful for you guys' attention, and I'm grateful to have you guys. Thank you.
That was dope, huh? That was good, huh? So my name is Jessica, and I am a trainee at Homeboy Industries. How can I say this? I always get nervous with these things. For me, I had tried Homeboys before, and it didn't work out. And I think the reason being is because when we come, we don't realize we come with so much hurt. We think we just come. Sometimes, I came for a job, right? But then there was so much stuff down there that I didn't know was the reasons that I was doing the things that I was doing, and I went to the places that I was going to, and I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. I'm from South Central, from the same urban area, and I came here as a child. They brought me from Mexico as a little girl. I was 6 months old when I got here. So all I've ever known is South LA. My mom tried to do her best to raise us, but she was a kid. She was a kid raising a kid. You know how that goes. Growing up, I was a really good student. I was a straight A student, honor roll student. I used to love school. I always loved school. I knew that the only way to get out of this situation where I'm at, we grew up broke. We used to have to go steal food just to be able to eat, and my mom was always working 3 jobs. She was always out trying to provide for us, and it was hard, and me as being the oldest woman, always the oldest child, I had to find a way to provide, even though it wasn't asked of me. It was just, you see everything going on and you just want to help, and then other things started happening in my household, a lot of abuse, a lot of sexual, physical, just abuse, just a lot of those things. And I still try to keep a really good grade because I knew that that was going to be the only way for me to get out of that environment and to bring my family with me. And I think that's where my problem started, was that I always thought I had to be loyal to everybody. Even though they were hurting me, I had to be loyal to them. So that kind of trickled on until when I got older. And then I started kind of resenting my own family and trying to run away from them. And then I ended up eventually finding a new family, and I felt like I owed them. Like I owed this loyalty, I owed everything to them because they were there for me when not even my own family was there for me. So a lot of the choices that I made them with this thing in my mind that is like, I'll do anything for you just because you showed me that little bit of love that I never had. You know, I'll do anything for you. Like I had that mentality, you know, and then being a girl in a gang was always harder because you're not really respected a lot of the times. So it's like you have to prove yourself a lot, which led me into a lot of messed up situations. And then I ended up coming to Homeboys, and like I said, the first time I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. There was a couple of times that I just wasn't ready, you know, and the program is really like when you come when you're ready, but don't ever stop coming. The doors are always gonna be here. They're always gonna be open for you, you know, don't ever stop coming. And then for a little while, I tasted a little bit of happiness. I ended up meeting somebody. I ended up falling in love, right? And we ended up having kids. And I never thought that was gonna happen. I always said I'm never ever gonna have kids because I don't want my kids to grow up in this lifestyle, because the day that I decided to get into that lifestyle, I knew what it was gonna bring, and I was fully dedicated for it. And then when I found out I was having kids, it was just kind of like, and then when I found out I was having girls, I was like, oh, wow, like, I have no idea how to raise a girl. Like, I was a tomboy, so to me, it's like, I don't even know how to be a girl, you know, like, and I was scared, and I was afraid, and I was so scared, and I remember going to Pops, and I'm with Father Greg, and he was just like, you're gonna be the most amazing mom. And I was just like, just so confused, and it was this thing of like, I was scared, but then eventually I ended up having my kids. I ended up being happy. I had a happy home. And then the problem there was that I hadn't healed myself. I had just found somebody else to share my pain with, somebody else that was also hurt, somebody else that had just came out of prison, and he had the same pain that I had, and we just kind of bonded. And the love is there, of course, but it was just we never healed each other. And so we ended up making some mistakes, and things happened. And actually, 2017 of September, me and him got arrested, and my kids got taken away. That was the last day I saw my son, and that was the last time I saw him, like my whole family. I've been trying to get everything back together, but it's at a point where he got sentenced to 159 years in prison, and I got left out here with just me and my girls, you know, and I'm grateful because I was always able to come to Homeboys, and I'm grateful because they helped me realize that the fact that I didn't work on myself before was what didn't work. It wasn't anything else. It was just that I was still hurt, and I didn't know what else to do when I was hurt, rather than the things that I already knew. And that's what led us in that position, you know, left us in that position. And for me to hear my daughters, like, right now, I ended up finishing fighting my case. I was fighting 20 years. I beat my case. I won. And now I'm just left out here with my girls, and my girls cry for their father every single day. They're 3 and they're 4. They're 3 and 4. And they ask me, when's Daddy coming home? And it's hard, but I have a peace in my heart that's like, I can't explain it, because I know I'm not gonna do the same things I did before. And I know I'm not gonna leave my daughters. And that's what I've learned at Homeboys. Like, there was no other way that I would have been able to learn that. Because even my own family always thought therapy doesn't work, doesn't work, you just gotta get over it, you just gotta keep going, you just gotta get over it. You know, like, that doesn't work either. So they taught me something different. And that's just me in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with all of you. Thank you, Jessica and Todd, for representing. And the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I am closer to God than the two of you. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Holy Family. I was here this morning for a funeral for the Bolligers, Goods of Rudy, for Dr. Richard Nalick. And so I'm back here again this evening. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. So it's the privilege of my life for 35 years to have worked with gang members. I should say since Santa Clara, I have an honorary degree from there. I don't know if that counts for anything. I didn't work for it or anything, but they gave it to me nonetheless. I had forgotten that I had, because we used to think Berkeley, but I guess I have a degree from, there you go. It's a privilege to know the homies, and I've learned everything of value from them. And there was a guy named Joey who worked at Homeboy for a time, and he was really a dynamic speaker. He liked speaking. So he was on call. High schools would ask for him by name, and so he would go, and he loved doing it, and he was kind of becoming, this was part of his identity, he was a speaker. And so one night we went out to dinner, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly. I was indeed grateful. And he said, you gotta pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. I said, yeah, no shit. That is some good advice there. Thank you for all the Jesuit references, men and women for others, and men and women with and for others is another way that people talk about it. And the homies aren't all that up on the Ignatian thing, or we've had always upwards of 3 to 4 Jesuits who work there at any given time. And but Jesuit isn't a thing that the homies kind of know what that is really. And we have like 4 or 5, 6 tour groups a day. When I came back from the funeral today, it was just filled with tour groups and homies walking through our headquarters in Chinatown. And once I was in my office, and I have a glass enclosed office, and I was talking to some homies, and then this tour group just stopped in front of my office, and it was one of those observe our founder in his natural habitat. So, and I kind of, wave, and the tour guide was Gilbert, and Gilbert has a loud-ass voice, and so he says, and this is Father Greg Boyle. He is the founder of Homeboy Industries. He is a jiu-jitsu priest. I gave some of my better moves, to kind of prove the point, Anyway, here's why I think you're here tonight, if I can be so bold. It's because here's what the longing is in the world at the moment, and especially in the United States of America at the moment, is we're longing for a world that might just look differently than it currently looks. There you go. And Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she said that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So you're here tonight because you want to stand against forgetting that. There's an idea that's taken root in the world. It's at the root of all that's wrong with it. And the idea would be this, that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. And so you stand against that idea. And to that end, you want to imagine with God a circle of compassion, and then imagine no one standing outside of that circle. And what we're called to do is to actively dismantle the barriers that exclude. And so we try to inch our way out to the margins, as Pope Francis always invites us, because the circle can't widen unless we locate ourselves out at the margins. So we stand there, and you look under your feet, and the margins are getting erased because that's where you chose to go. And you stand with a particularity with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and you stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear, and you get to stand with those whose dignity has been denied. And what a privilege it is to locate yourselves with the easily despised and the readily left out. You get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And what a privilege to stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And so we choose to create a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. Because no kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. No matter how singularly focused we may well be on those worthy goals, they actually can't happen unless there's some undergirded sense that we are connected to each other. And I suspect if kinship happened to be our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we would be celebrating it. And we brace ourselves as we go to the margins because it's more than likely we will be accused of wasting our time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." So you go to the margins and other voices get heard. Well, the truth of the matter is none of that makes a damn bit of sense were it not for our notion of God being more spacious and expansive. And I think that's important because I think there's nothing more consequential to our living than how wide and spacious our notion of God is. Teresa of Avila used to always say, the notion of God is a jar that needs to keep breaking, which is to say widening, make room for something larger. And that's what you hope will happen. And St. Ignatius of Loyola talks about the God who's always greater. Once when you think you've landed on this partial, puny God, God is trying to say, think again. I had a spiritual director once who said to me, we need a better God than the one we have. He was a jiu-jitsu priest. But he's, of course, right, because we settle for partial, puny, tiny, the realistic God. We settle for the God created in our own image. My friend Annie Lamott always says, you've created God in your own image when God hates the same people you do, which is a good thing to remind ourselves of at the moment. So you want to you don't want to settle for partial when you can have spacious. And that's kind of an essential thing. Meister Eckhart, who was a mystic and a theologian who died like 500 years ago, used to say, it is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. And we kind of don't believe that, actually, because we've settled for this third grade God, exacting, judgmental, easily disappointed in us. And so we want to break this wide open. The homies are always helpful in this regard. Usually they do it in ways that are kind of surprising, usually by mangling, the English language. It kind of becomes very illuminating as well as delightful. So a lot of examples of that. I have endless examples. But so there was a homegirl named Lisa who was a trainee like Jessica and Todd. And at the end of the day, her man came to pick her up, and so she wanted to introduce him to me. So she brought him into my office, and she said, "This is my sufficient other." And I said, "No doubt." One of the great things for the moment is that I don't run Homeboy anymore. I have a CEO, Tom Voso, who's wonderful, and he runs the place. So it's nice to not have to, figure out budgets and meeting payroll. Somebody else has to do that. And so I had a homie come into my office and early morning, one of the trainees, and he said, "Damn, gee, my lady, she is in a bad mood today." And I said, "Why?" "Well, she's beginning her administration period." I said, "Well, I just finished mine, so kind of know what she's going through." But my favorite one of all happened when I was presiding at Mass at San Fernando Juvenile Hall in a big gym, 500 gang members, and all sitting in chairs, like you guys. And I was up on a little raised platform, and I was vested in my alb and stole, and they have these little sheets, that have the readings in them in English and Spanish, and so you do this when you're as a presider. Sometime I just rested it on my lap, and I said, "Well, I'm going to listen to the word being proclaimed." So one by one, the homies got up, and the first homie got up and did the first reading, and then the second guy got up to do the responsorial psalm. And I was just noticing an overabundance of confidence in his voice. And he gets up and he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I said, "What the hell?" And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. Because if you take a minute to think about it, the exalted God is really the God created in our own image. There's nobody sitting here right now. If you weren't God, you would want to be exalted. It's just the way it is. Face it, but the exhausted God, you get it. You kind of go, wow, yeah, your parents, you know what it's like. And it's generous, and no, it's not about me, it's about my kid, and that's way better. And there's notions of God that need to be like jars that need to be broken so you can make room for something larger, because it is this notion of a spacious, wide, expansive God that will lead you, once you've encountered this joyous intimacy with such a God, which leads you to be a certain way in the world. As God is delighting in you, you delight in the person right in front of you. And then God's dream comes true eventually, which is kinship, connection. A God who says, "It's not about me, it's about you." Or as Jesus says, "that you may be one." I have images that abound of not all that long ago. Myself and my sister, we buried our 92-year-old mama who had 8 kids. And I had buried my father like almost 25 years ago. But she died as someone would want to, in her own bed, in her own home, surrounded by the people she loves. So she had 5 girls and 3 boys. And sharp as a tack, till the very end. In fact, the last year of her life, she watched so much MSNBC, she was becoming Rachel Maddow. And she wasn't a lick afraid of dying. In fact, just a couple weeks before she died, she said to me, like with giddy, positively giddy, "I've never done this before." And it was like something you would say before skydiving. And in fact, her last words to me before she died was the day before she died. And I happened to be there by myself, and she was asleep, and she woke up and she saw me and she said, "Oh, for crying out loud." Well, she was pissed off that she hadn't died, and sorry. But the next day, my sisters had gone out to get lunch, and again, I was there by myself. It was exactly at noon, and she was asleep or whatever. And our eyes just widened, and she let out this tiny, wondrous, glorious gasp. And then she left us. And nobody in earshot of that sound could ever be afraid of death again. But I tell you all that because there was this thing that she did in the last weeks of her life. There'd be 2 or 4 or 8 of us, her kids, standing around her bed. And when she would come to, she would lock onto one of us, and she'd just, with breathless delight, she'd say, "Oh, you're here. You're here." And after I buried her, I realized I think that's probably the singular agenda item on the list of things to do for our God, is to look at you and to say, "You're here. Behold the one beholding you and smiling." You receive the tender glance, and then you don't know what to do with it except to be the tender glance in the world. And only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. And there's nothing more consequential than the notion of this God. You notice the notice of God, and then you become that notice in the world. And so you do service, which is a place where you begin, but you don't want to end there, because service is the hallway that gets you to the ballroom. That's where you want to end up. You want to end up in this place of connection and exquisite mutuality. I remember I was giving a talk in Houston, and kind of a former gang member, a guy had been in prison. Now he's working with gang members in the streets of Houston. And he kind of pleaded with me with great earnestness. And he said, "How do you reach them?" Meaning gang members. And I found myself saying to him, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? And then suddenly you've turned something on its head. You're receiving people. And then it's exquisitely mutual. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend. And he was the best listener of anybody I've ever been in the presence of. Wow. If you were talking to him, nobody else existed but you. Laser beam focused. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if the mayor was coming by. No, only you. His whole being said, "You're here." The homies are used to being watched, but they're not used to being seen. The Buddhists begin a lot of their writings by saying, "O nobly born, remember who you really are." And that's just an essential thing. When we were kids, we discovered that our mom was an opera singer. We discovered this by kind of rummaging through a box and found an old record, and she had recorded the Christmas carol, "O Holy Night." And we just played the grooves off of this thing, and we couldn't believe that the woman who hollered at us had this voice, and And I remember there was this one line that became a mantra for me. "Long lay the world in sin and error pining till he appeared, and the soul felt its worth." And yeah, it's about Jesus, and yeah, it's about Christmas, but how is it not the job description of everybody seated in this room? You appear, and the soul feels its worth. It's you encountering somebody and saying, "Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. You're here. You're here." But famously, Cesar Chavez, a reporter, had said to him, "Wow, these farm workers, they sure love you." And he just smiled and shrugged and said, "The feeling's mutual," which is the hope. How do we get to that place of mutuality? There was a homie, nobody found more job opportunities than this guy we all called Dreamer. I knew him growing up in the Pico Gardens housing projects. He was in my parish. I knew his whole family. His older brothers got into a gang, so did he. Super smart kid with a dangerous sense of humor. And he's in his 40s now, doing fine. He's construction trade. He's in recovery. He's married, kids. But in his early 20s, he was a knucklehead, and he was in and out of being locked up. And he'd come to see me, and I'd find him a job in the private sector or in one of our 9 social enterprises at Homeboy Industries. But always before too long, he'd gravitate back to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of. And then he'd wander back to me, and it was a very repetitious pattern. So this one time he finished a 4-month stretch of probation violation at county jail, and there he was sitting in front of my desk. And he says what gang members often say, this time it'll be different. And I said, all right. So with him sitting there, I picked up the phone. I called a friend of mine who owns a vending machine company, a guy named Gary in Alhambra. And Gary had hired homies in the past, so I'm thinking, hoping against hope, maybe he'll do it again. And sure enough, he says, you tell that guy he can start tomorrow. That's a holy man right there. So Dreamer began work the very next day at the vending machine company. And, 2 weeks later, there he was again in front of my desk. I couldn't believe my eyeballs. I said, Híjole, Madre Santa. Here we go all over again. But this time he reached into his pocket and he pulled out this envelope and his very first paycheck. And he said, damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well. Who? And he looked at me strangely and he said, well, God, of course. Oh, sure. No, that's right. That's right. That would be God. You thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh, God's number one. He said, you are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days. So what now, the Genesis days? He goes, yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now. Well, the thing I most remember was the two of us, we literally fell out of our chairs, howling with laughter, falling on the floor. And I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider, who's the service recipient, who's reaching whom. It's mutual. Well, Homeboy Industries was started a long time ago, 1988. I had hair. And I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission. It was nestled in the middle of 2 public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, it was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other, which was unheard of in public housing anywhere. And with 8 gangs at war with each other, this led the LAPD to call my parish the place of the highest concentration of gang activity anywhere in the city. And so I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 226th 2 months ago. Not all from that parish, but I run a large gang intervention program, and I get asked to do this. So the first thing we did was we started a school because we had all these junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. And so they were wreaking havoc in the projects. They were writing on the walls, selling drugs. They were violent. So I walked out to them and I would kind of isolate them, and I'd say, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them. So that kind of forced my hand. So right across the street from the church is our parochial school, grades K to 8, first 2 floors. But the entire 3rd floor was the convent. And so one evening I gathered all the nuns together in the living room. I sat them down. I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out? And we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And so they looked at each other and they went, sure, which was the entirety of their discernment process. And so we were off and running, and gang members came in large numbers to the church property. And this created something of a disconnect. Parishioners would sidle up to me and say, hey, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out. And I thought that was a good gospel challenge. And so then the homies in the school would say, if only we had jobs. So myself and the women in the parish, we marched around the factories that surrounded the projects trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. And so we started stuff, a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rival enemy gang members. And then in 1992, some of you were around to remember this, after the Rodney King verdict, the whole city exploded, and every pocket of poverty ignited, except the poorest pocket, my parish didn't. And so the LA Times wanted to know why that was, and so they asked me, and I said, well, maybe in part it's because we have 60 strategically hired gang members, all from rival enemy gangs. And they had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and more to the point of your question, a reason not to torch their own community. So the article appeared, and then the day after, I get summoned to a Beverly Hills office of Ray Stark, who was a movie producer who happened to have $500 million. And so he called me into his office and he said, what should I do with my money? And as I look back on it now, I can see that I woefully undershot my request. So I said, well, across the street from the school is an abandoned bakery. You could buy it. It has ovens. They don't work. You could fix them. And we could put hairnets on rival enemy gangs and gang members, and they could bake bread. I don't know. We could call it Homeboy Bakery. That was the extent of my entire business plan. And he said, sure. So there we were. And a month later, we started Homeboy Tortilla in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this. Not everything worked. This will be on my tombstone. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And nobody ever intends to do this. You back your way into it. You evolve. And now we're the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on our planet. We never set out to do that, but we did it. And so 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors and trying to reimagine their lives. Every gang member who walks through our doors comes with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was frightened or frightening, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. Hugely traumatized, carrying big old backpacks filled with chronic toxic stress, and they need rest before you can do anything else. And then they find the place as something of a sanctuary, then they become the sanctuary that they sought, and then they leave us and they go present this sanctuary to their kids, and suddenly you've broken a cycle. And so they gain resilience and they re-identify who they are in the world, and after their 18 months of this essential healing, the world will throw at them what it will, but this time they won't be toppled. For no hopeful kid has ever joined a gang in the history of the world. And gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery, and misery loves company. And no kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something, and there are no exceptions. So healing is kind of the centerpiece of what we try to do there. Therapy, we got a ton of them. Case managers, navigators, free tattoo removal. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos than we do. And we have a designated clinic and with 3 laser machines, 1 paid physician assistant, and 43 volunteer doctors. And it was all started because of a kid named Frank who wandered into my office. I didn't know him. He was 2 days out of blanking out on the prison in Donovan, I think it was, and 2 days out of state prison. And he's sitting in front of my desk, and tattooed on his forehead like a big old billboard filled with big black block letters, it said, "Fuck the world." And he looked at me and he said, "You know, I am having a hard time finding a job." And I said, "Well, you know, Frank, maybe we could put our heads to this one." So I found a doctor at White Memorial Hospital who donated 1 hour a month. He was a dermatologist with a laser machine, and he chipped away at Frank's forehead and about 5 others. And then before too long at all, we had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members who wanted this same treatment, you know, and so we couldn't stay with that arrangement any longer. And so parentheses, Frank is a security guard at a movie studio, and there is no trace left of the angriest, dumbest thing he's ever done, proving once and for all that everyone is a whole lot more than the worst things they've ever done. And so then we have, classes and all our social enterprises, Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Silkscreen, Homeboy Homegrown Merchandise, Homeboy Grocery, where we sell chips, salsas, and guacamole, and supermarkets on both coasts. Homeboy Recycling, where we recycle electronic waste. Farmers markets. Homeboy Diner, did I mention that? The only place you can get food in City Hall. We have a restaurant, Terminal 4, American Airlines at LAX. And Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And they cater. It's a who's who, you know, you're always going to run into a celeb or a movie star, Jim Carrey or Jack Black or Forrest Whitaker, or elected officials, the mayor, and once Vice President Joe Biden, when he was vice president, 2 hours notice, Secret Service motorcade. He wanted to eat at the famous Homegirl Cafe. And then once famously, Diane Keaton showed up, an Oscar winner, movie star. Her waitress was Glenda, and Glenda's a big girl, been there, done that, tattooed, felon, parolee, gang member. She has no clue who Diane Keaton is, and so she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, "Well, what do you recommend?" And Glenda rattles off the 3 dishes she really likes, and Diane Keaton says, "Well, I'll have that second one. That one sounds really good." And it's at that moment something dawns on Glenda. You know, she looks at Diane Keaton, she says, "Wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere. You know, like maybe we've met." And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. "Oh, gosh, I don't know. I suppose I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before." And then Glenda goes, "No, now I know. We were locked up together." Yeah, that just took my breath away. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly kinship so quickly. Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress. Exactly what God had in mind. That you may be one. All of us are called to be enlightened witnesses, people who, through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. We're all invited to look each other in the eyes at the margins and say, "You're here, O nobly born." At Homeboy, we don't hold the bar up and ask folks to measure up. Why? Because our exhausted God never does such a thing. Why would we do it? Instead, we hold the mirror up and we tell people the truth. You're exactly what God had in mind when God made you, and then people become that truth. They fully inhabit that truth. No bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. But, we're always having to reach in and dismantle messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. Marcus Borg, a scripture scholar, says that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout Scripture is shame and disgrace. And I think he's quite right. You don't go to the margins to make a difference, because then it's about you. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. So in the original covenantal relationship, God says, "As I have loved you," and we're waiting for it, "love me back." But that's the God created in our own image, but God doesn't say that anywhere. God says, "As I have loved you, so must you have a special preferential care and love for the widow, orphan, and the stranger." Because God thinks these are the folks who know what it's like to have been cut off. And because they have suffered in exactly this way, God thinks these are the folks who happen to be our trustworthy guides to lead us to the kinship of God. Widow, orphan, and stranger, that sounds odd to our modern ears because we like widows, and orphans melt our heart, But the theologian Ron Rolheiser, I was just with him speaking in San Antonio, and he says, the widow, orphan, and stranger are those who society looks at and says, "We can live without you." And so at Homeboy Industries, we want to say, we can't live without you. We won't live without you. And so we dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace so that people can get at their truth. In the Acts of the Apostles, it has this one odd line that leaps out at you, and it says, "And awe came upon everyone." And it suggests that the measure of health in any community at all, including this one, may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So a number of years ago, I was invited to speak to what they call a gang in-service to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And a gang in-service is a 9 to 5 in a hotel ballroom, and it's keynotes and workshops and breakout sessions, and social workers can get credit learning about gangs and stuff. I'd done a bunch of these, and so I said yes. I bought my ticket to Richmond, Virginia, figuring I'd do a keynote or something. Well, a week before I was to fly, I pulled the letter out, and to my horror, it says that I am to be the only speaker 9 to 5 all damn day. And as the homies would say, oh, hell no. So I called 2 trainees in, Andre and Jose, and they were like in their 9th month of the 18 months. I sat them down in my office. I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I had never heard their stories, and Jose gets up first, and he was probably like 25 years old at the time, and gang member, tattooed. But in his 9th month or so at Homeboy, he had become a very valued member of the substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery. Now he was helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. And so not only had he spent a stretch in prison, he also had a long stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. She looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. And we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he continued, I guess I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage, and she knocks on the door. And the guy comes to the door, and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day, my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through. Second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. So let me wrap this up. I remember once I was interviewed by this nice Christian lady on the Christian Broadcasting Network, and we were sitting there, and she asked me about Homeboy, and I told her essentially everything I told you. You know, it was a place where thousands of gang members go to reimagine their lives and to find a second chance or even a first one. A place where they go where they find healing in a community of tenderness. A place where they experience in a palpable way being cherished, so then they can choose the joy there is in cherishing. and tattoo removal and job training and solar panel installation program. I went through the whole thing, took a long time. And when I finished my litany of what we do at Homeboy Industries, she kind of made a face like that. And she said, yeah, well, but how much time each day at Homeboy Industries do you spend, praising God? And I didn't know what to say. So I said, all damn day. And I don't think she liked that answer very much. But it begs this question, in which I will finish. What kind of praise does our exhausted God have any interest in? So it occurs to schools, universities in particular, sometimes to force their students to read my books against their will. I'm not complaining, but and so at Gonzaga University, my alma mater in Spokane, they forced the incoming freshmen one year to read Tattoos on the Heart, and they said, would you come up here and speak? And we have a big venue, 1,000 people, and please. And I said, sure. And then they said, could you bring 2 homies with you? And I do if people are going to pay for it, and I always pick homies in the same way. I always pick among our trainees, rivals, enemies, just to, so that they have to share a hotel room just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. And it was a number of years ago, I had 2 older vatos, and we were at LAX, and we were flying to Washington, D.C., and one of them, dead serious, said, hey, G, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, yeah, it's a requirement. We'll be coming home on American. So I picked 2 homies, Bobby, an African-American gang member who worked in the bakery, and then Mario, who at the time worked in our merchandise store in our headquarters. And so I've done this 1,000 times, easily, men and women. I've never picked anybody quite like this guy, Mario, who was just petrified to the bone, to the core of flying. It was starting to freak me out, and he was hyperventilating. I'd never seen this before. and we hadn't even boarded the plane yet, and so we're at Burbank, and, big bay windows and Southwest Airlines, big planes, but no hermetically sealed chute to board the plane. You walk out onto the tarmac like you're the president, and then you climb up the steps to go to the front of the plane. Big feature at Burbank, of course, are the steps at the back of the plane. So I'm sitting there, Bobby's exploring the airport, and our plane arrives. It's early morning. They're deplaning. Mario, that's going to be our plane. And I think, oh my God, he may die before we climb those stairs. And so then I see our flight crew arrives, and it's the pilot and flight attendants. There are 2 female flight attendants. Both of them have very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the steps to go to board the plane. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, well, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. So I should tell you that in our 31-year history as an organization, nobody has been more tattooed in our organization than this guy, Mario. And he's all sleeved out, neck blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say the end, so that when he's lying in his coffin, there will be no doubt for anybody. And I've never been in public with him, so I'm walking him through Burbank Airport, and people are literally, oh my God. And mothers are clutching their kids more closely. I'm thinking, wow, isn't that interesting? Because if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow and walk up to anybody there and say, quick, who's the kindest, most gentle soul who works here? They won't say me. They'll think for half a second, they'll go, Mario. Yeah, Mario. He works in the cafe. A lot of you know him. Mario is proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. He's proof of what Jean Vanier, the founder of the L'Arche community movement, has said, that tenderness is the highest form of spiritual maturity. So we get to Gonzaga, and of course there's the big talk Tuesday night. They never tell you about the 93 other talks that are going to happen in the course of the day. All these classrooms and meetings and lunch and classrooms all day. And so I tell these two guys, I'm not going to give any of these talks. I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom. And you get up and tell your stories. And they were terrified, especially Mario, but they did a good job. Stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse of every imaginable kind. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a single day of either of their childhoods. So the nighttime talk comes, and there are 1,000 people standing room only, and so I coax these two to get up and do a 5-minute snapshot of their lives as they had done earlier in the day. Mario in particular was quite petrified, but they did a good job. And then I got up and did my thing so that I could call them up for question and answer, which we're probably not going to do tonight, but I did it then. And yeah, yes ma'am. And a woman stands. And she says, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate. And Mario is a tall, skinny drink of water, and he walks up to the microphone, he clutches it. Yes. And he's just terrified. And she says, well, Mario, you say you're a father, and you have a son and a daughter who are about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? And Mario closes his eyes and he clutches the microphone, and he's starting to tremble, and he's getting a friggin' hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say. And when suddenly he blurts out, as soon as he says those two words, he rushes back to his microphone, clutching, closed-eyed refuge. And now I know he's losing the battle with his tears. But he wants to get the whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence. Until the woman who asked the question stands again, and now it's her turn to cry. And she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving. You are kind. You are gentle. You are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hand, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. But everybody standing had been returned to themselves, which shouldn't surprise us because it's mutual. Everybody standing and staring at each other and saying, oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. You're here. You're here. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in. And so we commit ourselves to leave this place and to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. We leave this place tonight to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside the circle. And we don't go to the margins to make a difference. We go to the margins so that Mario will make us different. Widow, orphan, stranger, trustworthy guides. And soon enough, we cease to care if anyone accuses us of wasting our time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Thank you all very much.